Hello, everyone. Welcome to uh, Informed by Experience, the Strength of Personal Perspectives and Collaborative Content. This is a panel with Jason Wood, Robert Duff, Amelia Tait, and it is moderated by me, William Hornby. I'm going to get started by reading a few of our bios, and then we'll get started with the questions. So, starting with Amelia. Amelia is a journalist at The Guardian, The New York Times, New Statesman, and Esquire, among others. Amelia Tait is a freelance features journalist who writes culture, trend, and technology stories for The Guardian, The New York Times, New Statesman, and Esquire, among others. In 2020, she was named one of Forbes 30 Under 30 in Europe. She has also won a number of freelance writing awards. Amelia regularly writes personal essays about her experience of anorexia as a teenage girl. Jason Wood is the director of communication at NAT. Did I say that correctly? Great. Jason Wood turned his battle with orthorexia into a mission to break the stigma around men's mental health and eating disorders by publishing his memoir, Starving for Survival. Through numerous podcast appearances, speaking engagements, and his writing, Jason strives to start an important conversation that encourages everyone, especially men, to speak up and share their stories and to get the help they deserve. And Robert Duff, PhD, is a clinical psychologist his private practice, an author, and a journalist at the New York Times, and the host of Hardcore Self-Help podcast. Robert Duff, PhD, is a clinical psychologist and author providing in-person services to individuals in Ventura and Santa Barbara County and online services to individuals anywhere in California. He currently provides psychotherapy within his own practice and neuropsychological assessment through Insight Neuropsychology. And my name's William. I am an eating disorder recovery advocate on the internet and elsewhere, and I work with various nonprofit and for-profit organizations to create educational content around eating disorders. So welcome, everyone. I'm so happy to have you here. Thank you for tuning in for this important discussion. And so I'd love to get started. Without sharing any potentially triggering specifics, so no numbers, weights, or specific habits, can you please tell us your personal or clinical experience with eating disorders and or mental health in general? I'd love it if we could start with Amelia.
I suffered from anorexia as a teenager for about 4 years, from the age of 14 to the age of 18. I consider myself fully recovered from the age of 21, so a decade now I've been recovered. I also suffered from chewing and spitting disorder within that.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing. Uh, Jason, can you go now?
After falling into the trap of diet culture in my teen years and experiencing some traumatic experiences in my personal life, I struggled with an eating disorder that went undiagnosed for probably 15 to 20 years until I was diagnosed in 2020. I would later determine that my eating disorder was along the lines of orthorexia, which of course is not a formalized diagnosis, but that is the condition that most closely resembles what I was going through. I was also diagnosed with OCD, PTSD, and anxiety disorder at the same time.
Thank you for sharing.
Mhm.
And Dr. Duff.
Just call me Robert. It's all good. Don't need to do the PhD or the doctor or anything like that. Too many letters. I feel like a little bit more of a guest here in that I don't have personal experience with the eating disorder, though I'm no, stranger to dysmorphia myself, to be honest. I come from more of the clinical perspective. So I'm a therapist and I've worked with a number of people that have eating disorders or disordered eating behavior types, body issues, things like that. So I've talked with a lot of individuals. And then through my podcast, I also have taken a number of questions from people that have required me to kind of dive deep into those issues and, learn more from their perspective about it. And it's a really good sort of feedback loop for helping me work with people to kind of get the personal experience and then help individuals as well.
I'm sure there's a lot of comorbidity that exists within all of these mental health disorders. And it's very helpful to have informed clinicians that know how to deal with those comorbidities and be sensitive to the things that could activate someone between these diagnoses. So thank you for taking the extra step to learn about all of that. So I want to start with Jason here with this next question. But all of you, this applies to all of you. All of you are esteemed writers about mental health, which, as we all know, includes eating disorders. How does your personal experience with mental health inform your coverage of eating disorders or mental health in general when you're writing about it?
Yeah, so that writing for me was my outlet. It's always been how I can connect with a lot of those thoughts and emotions. It allows me the ability to be able to process. So writing has been crucial to me since I was a kid. And I found that through my writing, I am better able to illustrate what the lived experience is actually like. You can read about it in a textbook, but when you read the scientific definitions of these different behaviors or the different conditions, it doesn't really resonate. When you can really pour in that emotion and you can pour in that lived experience and actually take yourself and the audience to those places, those dark places of the eating disorder battle, to me, that's when it really connects. That's when it resonates. And that's when you can truly paint a picture of what the lived experience with an eating disorder is actually like. So for me, when I'm writing, I take myself back to those days so that I can truly illustrate what it's like to live with this condition.
Thank you. Amelia.
Yeah, I've had an interesting journey with my writing about eating disorders in that when I started, I think I wanted to detach myself and I was writing reported features where I was interviewing other people and kind of neutrally talking about the topic and not holding my hand up and saying, this was me. And it took a lot of time for me to come out and say that. And that is a very freeing thing. But I also think as Jason has said, it is more valuable for the audience because they can connect to you on that. And there's specifics, as Jason said, in your story versus that kind of neutral observer. So yeah, and I think that having my own experience has really helped me to be sensitive when I do interview people, because I still do interview people, that a lot of eating disorder stories we see in the media want a really straightforward thing A happened, so thing B was the consequence, when actually we still don't know a lot about where eating disorders come from, and there's multiple biological, social factors. So being able to interview people with that mindset, not sort of mining them for their trauma, but instead saying, tell me about your life and your experience. Yeah, I think that really informs my work and hopefully makes it better for the reader.
I know for a fact that it does. It's very helpful to have a background in the thing that you're interviewing people about and the thing that you're writing about from a somewhat objective stance in nonfiction writing. Robert, let's hear from you.
Well, first off, you guys are awesome, Jason and Amelia. Like when I was starting to get interested in mental health and becoming maybe a psychologist, or I didn't know what I wanted to be at the time, it was reading things like memoirs and personal experiences that really gave me the push to go and do that, because it is that sort of rooted lived experience. And I was on a pretty straight line path through my school of I think it's like 21 years straight of school, not taking any breaks to get a doctorate. And in that time, you learn a lot from textbooks, but you can also be really stuck in kind of the bubble of, like, you kind of talk about the clinical speak and just diagnostic criteria and all that stuff, but that doesn't mean crap about what it's actually like, so having perspectives that are actually written from the first person was really helpful for me. And then, in terms of writing, when I started writing, it was actually when I was in my what you call pre-doctoral internship. So you finish your schooling, but you have to do like hours toward getting your degree and stuff like that. And so I was living in a little apartment with my wife in San Diego, California, being like really underpaid, overworked. And she was having a hard time with that sort of scenario as well. And things kind of culminated in her being hospitalized. And I was really, really frustrated about that, being kind of within the bubble of the field, but still, having this situation where nothing she was doing seemed to help. None of the resources she was looking for seemed to actually kind of hit. And so I started writing in a more grounded way, just sort of out of frustration of like, why are we writing things that don't actually apply to the people who need to read them, or don't take into account the issues that they're actually having? For instance, how is somebody with really severe depression or anxiety or any sort of mental health issue going to read a giant treatment manual or something like that? And what they need is something that can actually help and is actually informed by real experience. So that's kind of where I started writing my books from, and the podcast stemmed from that. And so it's just really important for me to kind of try to be a real person, and not be sort of up in whatever ivory tower or something like that because there's letters after my name. And I think that really informs why I do what I do.
I think that's incredibly important. I think that a lot of people who go through that 22-year education med school path tend to come out on the other end of it kind of traumatized from the amount of work that they've had to do, and burnt out from the amount of work that they've had to do. And when any civilian questions their authority on like maybe they're being anti-fat within the doctor's office, or doing any kind of discriminatory practice within what they're doing, they are very quick to dismiss it as, well, you didn't go to 22 years of med school, so you don't know how to advocate, or you shouldn't be advocating for yourself in this space. I'm concerned about your health, when really they're trying to do things by the book and not like individualizing the experience of medicine, which is a very, very important thing to do. And I'm so proud of you for having gone through that journey and coming and come out on the other side of it with this perspective of everyone is an individual and everyone deserves like individual treatment. That's an incredibly important journey for any medical professional to go through. So thank you for taking that on.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to acknowledge that, because I think that if we have any other medical professionals listening in, it's very important to know that like you do know a ton, especially if you have a specialty. If you are in specialized medicine, you know a ton about that specialty. And also, med school doesn't teach absolutely everything, and all of us, no matter where we are, grew up in this society we all exist in, and we all bring the biases we've been taught into whatever space we are existing in, whether it's a doctor's office or at a customer service job. We all carry these biases with us, and it's really important to check them and continue to unlearn and learn. So yeah, once again, thank you, Robert. You touched on a little bit this next question, which is, why do you think it is important to have people with lived experience studying and covering eating disorders and mental health in general? Robert just offered that it has helped him in his own practice, because it has helped him to see how individualized treatment is so important for individuals going through any given mental health problem. But Jason and Amelia, as you've lived with eating disorders and you're, covering eating disorders as writers, I'd love to hear your take on that question.
Yeah, I feel like we're better equipped to spot the gaps in current coverage, and see where the media is going wrong, and films and stories and TV is going wrong in their portrayals of kind of portraying the same story over and over again. And, when I work with certain editors, that might be what they want. They want to say, oh, how much was she eating? How much did he exercise? And they want these salacious stories. Whereas we can really go in on a human level, and understand people as individuals, as Robert said. And also, yeah, spot those gaps. So one of the earliest stories I did as a freelancer was about people who have anorexia but are overweight, which is something that the media generally ignores. The medical profession has ignored on occasion because it's within the diagnostic criteria. And that, I think, was quite eye-opening for a lot of people, that, someone who is overweight could have these disordered behaviors and their disorder was no less serious because they weren't emaciated. so yeah, I was able to spot that gap in media stories and write about it, because I knew that fundamentally it was more about what was on in my head than my body. You know, the media really wants the bodies. They want pictures of ribs and collarbones and, as I said, those salacious stories. But it fundamentally, you know, eating disorders are a mental illness, and I think, yeah, having suffered it, we're better equipped to actually dive into people's brains and tell those stories.
Absolutely, I agree. And I want to add in here as well that less than 6% of people with restrictive eating disorders are in a body that would be classified on the BMI as underweight. And while we don't give the BMI any kind of credence in the eating disorder world, it is arguably horrible science. So those terms underweight, normal weight, overweight, and the O word, which we won't say out of respect for fat audience members, that is often weaponized against people in doctors' offices. We need to remember that those are arbitrary and they're based in white supremacy, and they really truly don't indicate whether someone is struggling with an eating disorder or not. You can't look at someone and see whether they have an eating disorder. Um, so thank you, Amelia, for pointing that out and for talking about that. Jason, I'd love to hear your response to the question.
Yeah. So one of the things that came to mind right away for me is it gives us the ability to gain the trust of the individuals who we're talking to or who we're interviewing. I know that when I speak to somebody, vulnerability breeds vulnerability. When I can open up and share my own story and say, hey, I've been there too. I somewhat understand what you're going through. I know your experience is different than mine, but we all kind of share that same common struggle. That the person is more willing to share parts of their story that maybe they wouldn't share with somebody else. So I think it's so important for those of us with the lived experience to put ourselves out there and be vulnerable and set that example for other folks so that they can also be vulnerable and share the aspects of their story with us. Because I think it opens up just a two-way street of healing. I know every time I have the opportunity to share my story to this day, I heal a little bit more. And I would hope that those around me who are listening also get that same feeling and that same sense of healing when they hear my story and they open up then and share their story. So I think it's one of those things where the lived experience can connect us. Having an eating disorder, I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. It's a horrible thing. But at least because it's happened, I've been able to connect with some incredible folks around the world who together we realize that we're not alone and that there is a power in sharing our stories and speaking up.
That's beautiful, Jason. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Mm-hmm.
I want to add in here as well that I think it's so important for individuals with intersectional identities to be speaking about their experiences with eating disorders, because a white, gay, cisgender man like me talking about my experience with an eating disorder might not be a relatable experience for a black, straight, cisgender man who has had an eating disorder. We've had very different experiences of the society. We've developed eating disorders for possibly similar and possibly dissimilar reasons. And it's important that we have people at every intersection of identity talking about their experience, because those experiences make people feel community and make people feel not alone. And that allows them to reach out of isolation and seek help. So thank you both for the work that you've done with your lived experience. Robert, would you like to add anything else?
Sure. Just piggybacking on and reflecting the importance of that personal experience, like diagnosis is supposed to be a starting place. It's a shorthand. It's not everything, and one of the things that a lot of clinicians ignore, even within diagnostic criteria, is this little bullet point that says, or if it's causing significant distress to the person, right? Like you said, you can't look at someone and say, oh, they have an eating disorder or they have this or that. And there's a lot of, unfortunately, gatekeeping and gaslighting and things that happen about, whether it's an eating disorder and you say, oh, you don't look like XYZ, you don't look like that disorder, or it's ADHD, and they're like, hey, you have a job, you should be fine, whatever. If it's really, really hurting you, if it's impacting your life in a very personal way, then that matters, And so I think that talking about that more, it gives individuals struggling with things, more of a confidence to advocate for themselves in situations where they might be encountering a clinician that's not, in the right realm with that.
Absolutely agree. I think that's also why it's so important that people are aware of eating disorders and diagnoses like OSFED, which stands for Other Specified Feeding or Eating Disorder, because a lot of people's eating disorders don't fit cleanly into a diagnosis box. And a lot of times people will screen and search things online and see that there isn't really a diagnosis that seems to fit them perfectly and think, well, I don't have anything wrong with me then, so I'm not going to go do anything. So it's really important that we talk about how diagnoses are just a starting point and how, again, everyone's treatment is going to be individualized. So thank you for pointing that out. I'm going to move on to our next question, which is many people who create mental health recovery content stop creating it after they're no longer actively suffering. Those of us who stick around and continue to advocate usually have a why for doing so. What is your why if you have one?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and share
Let's start
my
with
why.
Jason. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, that's all right. Yeah, I'll get this conversation started. So, my why is because when I was coming to terms with my eating disorder, and it's just like you were talking about, I didn't meet some criteria, I didn't meet the diagnosis perfectly. So, I questioned whether I was sick for a very long time. And I think that made me mad. And that motivated me because I realized that I had a responsibility now. I had to get out there and share my story so that other people weren't sitting at home suffering like I was, thinking that they're okay, thinking that this is normal, thinking that this is just how I'm going to live the rest of my life. So my I guess pivotal moment was watching Robin Roberts speak about her mantra of making your mess your message. And the moment that I heard that in my recovery, I was like, that's what I've got to do. I've got to go out and take this situation that occurred to me and help other people with it. And that is what motivates me every single day as I try to be that voice that I needed a couple of years ago when I was sitting there debating whether I was sick enough for help. I want folks to know now that there's no such thing as being sick enough for help. If something is going on in your life, speak up and seek it.
That is so important. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you, Jason.
Mm-hmm.
Amelia, do you want to take a crack at it?
Yeah, I agree with everything Jason has said. And I think, as I mentioned, I went from kind of doing reporting to personal essays, and it's the messages I would get off the back of those essays that just encouraged me to continue because I realized how much more it was getting to people, how much more they were relating, and how happy they were that someone had said something. So one of my early pieces that I did as reporting, I didn't mention that I'd suffered, was about chewing and spitting, which again is not as well known. A lot of people find it a lot more embarrassing to talk about. And I obviously did at that time. And I wrote it, as if I was an observer. And someone messaged me and said, oh my God, I didn't know that this was a thing. I did this. Thank you so much. And I messaged them and said, hey, just so me too. And having that experience and that interaction made me realize it's really valuable to share your own story and to just remove the stigma and any shame that people might feel about these experiences, because that's the only way that we're going to, move forward towards recovery and better advocacy.
Certainly. Once again, people just really need to see themselves represented. When we feel like we're struggling with something alone, we feel like there aren't resources, that no one knows what we're going through, and that we can't get help because it isn't a relevant problem. Maybe it just affects us. But it's so, so important that we talk about these things because that's how people find out that they need help. Robert, would you like to take a shot at it?
Yeah, I mean, I just think that it's great that where we're at right now with journalism, social media, what have you, we get to have different snapshots. There are memoirs like Jason has that have, the full picture of the journey, right? And then Amelia, you were talking about how you consider yourself recovered, at least from an aspect of what you've dealt with. And you're continuing on to create more and to write more. And I think it's amazing for people to be able to have those snapshots all throughout, and also like honest examples of, this is something that you can make less of a barrier in your life, and you could live a different type of life, for the rest of this timeline. That doesn't mean it's going to be perfect, and a lot of times through writing, social media, etc., you get that example of it's not always rainbows and butterflies, but it's real, and it can be a different version of your life than you may have had before. So that's what I would add to that.
Thank you so much. I'm going to move on to our next question, which is, many people call themselves mental health advocates, but they end up posting more triggering, disordered content than helpful content. What is something you would like to see change in the lived experience advocacy space? Let's start with Robert.
I think I would like to. It is a problem. It's a double-edged sword, right? People need that visibility. But sometimes what people really, really gravitate toward may or may not be very sound in sort of the claims that they're making. And research has even looked at this. This is a different space, but within ADHD content, they did a study where they looked at the top like 100 TikToks, and over 50% of them were considered to be misleading in terms of the information that they're providing, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in itself. But what I would like to see is people on either side, whether it's somebody who's more focused on being an expert or a clinician or an individual, just to be more clear about what our limitations are and what our scope is, and to not sort of overextend that. And then also to collaborate more. Like, it would be amazing if, from both sides, there was more collaboration to sort of fill in the picture, because, we both need it.
Completely agree with that. I think that everyone should be doing research that is well sourced and analyzed for bias, and that these conversations, if you're looking to become an advocate, like really doing the research to make sure that you are not misleading people and not putting out mis or disinformation out there. Jason, let's hear from you next.
Yeah, so one of the ironic things that I've seen in my journey is that at first I thought I was going to get out there and raise awareness of eating disorders and mental health issues in men. And somewhere along the way, I've become an educator for how to become an advocate. So I've found myself answering a lot of questions when people ask me, well, how do I share my story? How do I make a difference? How do I get out there and help other people? So I've taken that responsibility to heart, and I keep my messages open to anyone. So I'm constantly checking the DMs or the emails, and I will make an effort to respond to everybody and to build them up, to help build this next generation of advocates, because I know I can't do it by myself. So I think a lot of it has to do with, again, kind of that responsibility that we have as eating disorder advocates, to help other people find their right message, and to identify what could be triggering, what could be harmful to other folks. And I think another thing that we need to do in the space is to be that community, to be that support system, because unfortunately we live in a world where there's always going to be triggers. No matter what we do to try to erase them, there's always going to be those triggers on social media or in our day-to-day lives. So we need to make sure that that support system, that community, is really strong, so that we can be there to help other people when they do come across that misinformation or triggering content.
Absolutely. I think it's also very important to guide people towards resources when they are seeing those types of content. When you are putting out that kind of content, making sure that you have like links in your bio to the National Alliance for Eating Disorders and and Project Heal and other organizations that allow you to access help if you don't have insurance, or help you connect with help if you do have insurance, and help you find wonderful organizations like Within when you do have insurance and you're able to get to an organization like this. So I think that that's incredibly important. Amelia, let's hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a lot of tech reporting in my career, so I think my answer is slightly different, and in that I don't think the onus should be on the individual, because people are, perhaps at different stages of recovery, they're confused, they perhaps don't have the best perspective on themselves and what they're putting out there. So I think that, social media platforms could definitely do more. And if you're going to use a hashtag like eating disorder recovery, I don't see why TikTok couldn't, pop up a little checklist before you're allowed to post and say, just so you know, this could be considered triggering, avoid this, blah, blah, blah. Or as you mentioned, people should include links in their bio. Well, why couldn't TikTok do that, right? You use a hashtag like eating disorder recovery, then perhaps, just as standard, TikTok will offer a regional, helpline underneath the video. So I do think that there should be more pressure on these platforms to actually make sure things are safe, because, sadly, individual creators can't always know what's best, and maybe try to help but end up harming. So yeah, I think a more holistic approach could help.
Absolutely. I want to add in there that algorithms are designed to cater to what we seem to be not interested in per se, but things that we are likely to interact with. And sick people are likely to interact with content that makes them sicker, whether they intentionally want to or not. And so we really need to be pushing these organizations and these companies that are completely unregulated to take the interest of their consumers' mental health into account when they are putting these things on people's For You pages. It's very, very important. I can't fully speak to the UK's legislation, but I know that here in the US, we have gone 25 years without any regulation being passed on any of our internet companies. That predates Google, which is kind of crazy to think about, like, a world without Google. At least for me, I'm 24, so there hasn't been any internet legislation passed in my lifetime, and it is one of the, if not the leading reason why eating disorders are on the rise in every demographic. So I think that is an incredibly important point, and thank you, Amelia, for bringing it up. So moving on, I want to ask all of you, what is your advice for people seeking to start advocating for recovery from eating disorders in particular, or mental health disorders at large? Let's start with Amelia, if you don't mind. I know you just spoke.
No, that's fine. I think my main piece of advice is to check if you're ready. I do mentor a lot of young journalists and writers, and recently someone came to me and they wanted to write about their experience of being sectioned, but it literally happened 3 weeks ago at the point they emailed me, and I had to say to them, this story will still be valid in a year's time, and it might be more valuable in a year's time and better for you in a year's time if you share it then, rather than rushing to kind of get out. I mean, that's an individual choice. That's what I said to her. I didn't say don't do it, but I said think about it. And I think that's my advice, is to just think about whether you personally are ready to take on this mantle. Because, as much as we said that we enjoy and relish that responsibility, it's perhaps not for everyone, or not everyone is at the point where they're ready, because you don't know what people are going to message you or ask you, or whether that will be triggering to you individually. So I think, remember yourself in your advocacy.
It's incredibly important, and it's incredibly hard to be working in advocacy. And that there's really a duality there of, like, knowing that you've got this really important mission, but also, like, knowing that you have to take care of yourself before you can take care of other people. Because if you are sick yourself and you aren't able to give enough of yourself, and you also haven't had enough reflection to give that, like, share your story in that way, it's probably not going to be as helpful for people to hear what it's like for you to go through something that you're going through in that exact instant. It's much more helpful to have that reflection piece in there. So that is a really, really fantastic piece of advice. Thank you, Amelia. Let's hear from Jason.
Yeah, so along those lines, one of the things that came to mind right away is to take care of yourself. You have to prioritize yourself at the end of the day, because you can't help other people unless you take care of yourself first. Another thing that comes to mind is it's easy to get frustrated because you want to change the world. More than likely, if you've moved into advocacy, you're wanting to make a change and make a difference. And you'll reach out and you'll try this and you'll try that. And maybe you don't hear back from someone, or what the project you're working on doesn't have the results you think. You've got to stay patient and remind yourself that at the end of the day, if you can change one person's world, that's much better than trying to change the whole world. So that's kind of what I focus on, is just that power of one. Every single day when I wake up, I just know all I've got to do is try to connect with one person today and try to help them on their journey. I'm not going to change legislation or change the entire healthcare system by myself. But if I can help one person on their journey, then I'm proud of the work that I'm doing and happy with the work that's been done.
That's a really fantastic perspective, and I think very important for people, particularly seeking to do advocacy in the social media space. There's so much focus on numbers, and people, I think, quickly lose track of how big a number 500 is when they get 500 likes or 500 views on a post. You don't have to get a million likes on a TikTok in order for it to impact someone. It actually might be more impactful at 1,000 likes or 20 likes than it is at a million. It depends on the person you're reaching. And I think that like we all need to step back in this world and remember just how large these numbers are, and remember that each of those numbers represents an actual human being. So Robert, would love to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah. So speaking of, people who are looking to become advocates, like kind of piggybacking off of what Amelia said, I would encourage people to get in touch with like their why. Why do you want to do this? Why do you feel compelled to become an advocate? And spend a lot of time thinking about that, right? Have that sort of patience to continue taking a look at yourself and recognize that there are a lot of different options for how you can go about that, right? So we have one kind of picture of the TikTok influencer, and that might be what you're thinking, and that's totally cool, but there may be other avenues as well. And I think that as sort of an advocate versus, say, like a clinician or the head of some sort of department or something like that, it's also important to recognize the unique opportunity that provides, because you're not quite as limited by the structures of say medicine or whatever organization you're working for. And that can be really powerful, right? Like as a clinician, sometimes it's like, oh God, I really wish I could just do this, and yeah, I can't. Like, hands are a little bit tied in some ways, and so you have more freedom that way, which can be a positive and negative. It takes some responsibility, obviously. But you can look at it from any number of angles, right? You could talk about you talk about intersectionality. That's something that a lot of people in medicine maybe aren't focusing on, or bias. Maybe you do want to take a more academic approach and talk about the fact that research, is like kind of our gold standard, but like research isn't all one thing. Some research studies suck. Their methodology is terrible. And you could even talk about that, so there's so many different directions you could go. So I think that getting in touch with the why and recognizing what your unique strengths are and putting those together would be like a really great path for people.
I completely agree. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's also, while we're on the topic of advocacy, I just want to remind everyone who might be listening in and might be interested in advocacy that it doesn't only have to be to other people. You can also advocate for yourself. And that can look like knowing how to cite discrimination when you are in a doctor's office, if it's being directed towards you, knowing when to say, I don't think you're treating me fairly, is really important. And if you can find other people who are talking about what you are individually going through, that's worthwhile. It's worth consuming. It's worth hearing other people's experiences who have similar lived experience to you. So we are close to wrapping up. I have one final question for everyone, which is something I always like to end on. I'd like you guys to bring up something that has brought you joy recently. Uh, some kind of media, perhaps like a book, a movie, a video game, or like maybe you've traveled to a place that you really enjoyed, but something that people can take away with them and maybe be inspired to pursue or to look into, because I think that that's always really helpful and nice. So let's start with Jason.
Yeah, so right away, a memoir came to mind that I just read, and it's by the figure skater Adam Rippon, and it's called Beautiful on the Outside. And it is a hilarious read. He really just does a fantastic job of taking some very serious and troubling times in his life and bringing humor to them, which I think is a great way to resonate with a lot of audiences. And also for me, it was another example of how reading somebody else's experience, whether it's with an eating disorder or just general life struggles that we go through, can really help me understand my own story a little bit more. So that was a definite must read. I recommend it to everyone. You'll get a couple good laughs along the way too.
Love that, and love Adam. He's very,
Yeah.
very funny. Robert, do you have something?
Always. So recently I do a lot of audiobooks, like while I'm cleaning or driving to work and stuff like that. So right now I'm working on Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros. It's her first book in the series, but I love like a magic school sort of trope where you're going, through and progressing and getting more powerful and stuff like that. And it's about like dragon riders bonding to their dragons and discovering their power. And there's like a hot, dark, brooding, love interest with the slow burn sort of deal. So yeah, fires on a lot of cylinders there. And I've also been baking up a storm, which I'm really getting into. I just started this past year, and through Googling and Chat GPT, I've become a pretty good baker.
That's fantastic. I will make sure to check out that series, and also I would love to start baking. I'm not sure if I will, so I'm not going to claim that I will, but I think it's awesome that you're baking. And Amelia, what are
Yeah,
your recommendations?
I've written down that book title because you really sold it there. I feel like I should say a book because they both said a book, but I'm going to have to go with a video game, which is that I recently downloaded Stardew Valley on my Nintendo Switch, and it has been taking up all of my time. And if I wanted to intellectualize it and be highbrow, I could say it's very meditative to farm, but it's just really fun, and I'm loving it, and I can't wait to play it when we're off this call, frankly.
That is so fair. Um, that's so great. I have at least one recommendation. I'm going to throw in mine as well because we have a little bit of extra time before we're over. Um, a an academic source for everyone is, if you're not already listening to the Maintenance Phase podcast, it has to do with a lot of what we've talked about today. It is co-hosted by Michael Hobbs and Aubrey Gordon, and they are so brilliant, both of them. Michael Hobbs is kind of a podcast guru, and Aubrey Gordon is an incredible fat activist, eating disorder survivor, and author. She has two incredible books that I have loved reading very, very much. Um, I also recently saw Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, which is a small indie film that is based on the novel of the same title. And I highly recommend that as well, both the novel and the movie. So, yeah. Oh, and the last one I have is that yelling at the TV can be very cathartic. So, I have been watching, last year, we watched all of Glee in my household. And we were looking for the spiritual successor to Glee. So we obviously landed on Riverdale, which is an absolutely insane show. And we're in season 6 of that currently and flying through it. And we're probably going to go to Dynasty next. So I think like it's very cathartic to find bad media and, and yell at it. So those are my recommendations. Thank you guys for throwing yours into the pot. I think that we've given everyone a nice little collection of content that they can go check out. Any final words?
No, just thank you so much for having us. And yeah, it's been a great chat. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here and following along. And thank you to everyone who listened to us have this conversation. Thank you so much for being here as well.